When a waitress named Tanya Briggs walked up to table 9 on Valentine's night, she did not look up from her notepad. She did not say good evening. She did not say Happy Valentine's Day. She did not even make eye contact with the two people sitting in front of her. She just said 4 words, "You two ready yet?" and walked away before they could answer. Now here is the thing. That kind of thing happens in restaurants every single day. Servers have bad nights. Customers get ignored. Orders come out wrong. People leave unhappy. It happens, and most of the time the world never finds out about it, and life moves on. But this time was different. Because the man sitting at that table, the man in the plain white shirt and the low-pulled black cap, the man whose water glass sat empty for 40 minutes, the man who was served the wrong coleslaw and told he was wrong about it, was not just any customer. He was one of the most famous athletes alive. He had broken records that people said would never be broken. He had won championships in front of millions of people. He had a smile that had been on billboards across California, and a name that children wrote on their sneakers with permanent marker. And he had walked into that restaurant specifically so that none of that would matter. He just wanted a quiet dinner. He did not get one. But here is where the story stops being about bad service and starts being about something that will genuinely change the way you think about how you treat people. Because Tanya Briggs did not know something that night, something that was sitting in plain sight inside a legal document filed with the state of California, something that connected her to the man at table 9 in a way she never could have imagined. And when she found out, when she finally sat across a table from a woman who slid a piece of paper toward her and said 5 quiet words that rearranged everything Tanya thought she knew about the restaurant where she had worked for 3 years, her whole world shifted. Not in a cruel way, not in the way she feared when she first saw her own name spreading across the internet like a match dropped in dry grass. In a way she never saw coming, in a way that started with a handwritten letter and ended with something that no amount of viral outrage could have ever given her. But to understand why what happened to Tanya Briggs that night was not a punishment, why it was actually something far more powerful than that, you need to go back to the beginning. You need to start on the evening of February 14th, 2023, on a street in San Francisco lit up with fairy lights, with a man in an olive green jacket walking through the door of a restaurant called Fielder's Table, trying his best to be invisible. And you need to watch this entire video, because the cliffhanger is not who he was. You already know who he was. The cliffhanger is what he did next. And nobody, not Tanya, not the internet, not the 200,000 people who shared the story without knowing the whole truth, saw it coming. Stay with us. This is where it gets real. The city of San Francisco does not sleep on Valentine's Day. On the evening of February 14th, 2023, the streets around the Ferry Building Marketplace were alive in a way that only happens once a year. Fairy lights hung in the restaurant windows along the Embarcadero waterfront. The smell of garlic butter and fresh bread drifted out of open doors and mixed with the cold bay air. Couples walked close together on the sidewalk, shoulders touching, breath coming out in small white clouds. The Bay Bridge sat across the dark water, like a string of diamonds someone had dropped and forgotten to pick up. It was the kind of night that made even San Francisco, a city that had seen everything, look a little softer, a little more forgiving. Inside a restaurant called Fielder's Table, tucked between a wine bar and a florist on Stewart Street, the dinner rush was loud and full and warm. Fielder's Table was not a fancy place. That was the whole point of it. It had wood-paneled walls the color of dark honey. It had red and white checkered tablecloths that had been washed so many times they felt like old pajamas. A chalkboard menu hung above the bar in loopy handwriting, listing things like barbecue pulled pork sandwiches, seared salmon, and a dessert called the Golden Skillet Brownie that regulars ordered before they had even sat down. The lighting was dim and warm, the kind that made everyone look a little younger and a little happier than they actually were. It was the kind of restaurant where people went when they wanted real food and no performance. No dress code. No sommelier gliding over to whisper about the wine pairing. No tiny portions on big white plates that cost $30 and left you hungry on the drive home. It was, in other words, the last place anyone expected to see Stephen Curry. But that was precisely why he was there. Steph Curry, two-time NBA Most Valuable Player, four-time champion with the Golden State Warriors. The man who had shattered the all-time three-point record just 3 months earlier, on November 8, 2022, at Madison Square Garden in front of a New York crowd that gave him a standing ovation even though he was the enemy, did not always want to be famous. There were nights when he wanted to be a husband, just a husband, a man who took his wife somewhere quiet and held her hand across a checkered tablecloth and did not have to perform anything for anyone. February 14th was one of those nights. He came through the front door at 7 in the evening, wearing a dark olive green jacket over a plain white shirt, dark jeans, and a black cap pulled low over his forehead. No jewelry except his wedding ring. No bodyguard standing 6 steps behind him. No assistant checking the room first. Nothing that said, "Look at me," because everything about the way he dressed and moved said the opposite. Beside him was Ayesha Curry, wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress and her hair down, laughing softly at something he had just said before they even made it through the door. She had the easy, comfortable laugh of a person who is genuinely happy to be exactly where she is. The hostess who stepped forward to greet them was a 20-year-old college student named Priya Vasquez, working her second year at Fielder's table to help pay her tuition at UCSF. She looked up from the reservation stand with a practiced smile that lasted approximately 1 second before it froze on her face. She knew that face. The whole world knew that face. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for 2 menus. Her voice, when it came out, was careful and quiet, like someone trying very hard not to drop something fragile. "Welcome to Fielder's table," she said. "Just the 2 of you tonight?" Steph smiled. Not the billboard smile, not the post-game press conference smile. The real one, the one that started small at the corners and then spread slowly, like it meant it. "Just us," he said. "Somewhere quiet, if you've got it." Priya nodded and led them toward the window table near the back, table 9, where the bay was visible as a dark shimmer between the buildings and the noise of the restaurant softened just enough to feel like privacy. She set the menus down. She asked if they wanted still or sparkling water. Steph said, "Still would be perfect, thank you." Aisha was already looking out the window at the bridge lights with the expression of someone drinking something in. Priya walked back to her stand. She did not tell the dining room. She did not post anything. She did not text her friends, though her fingers itched to. She understood, the way some people are born understanding, that this man had come here to disappear for a few hours, and that protecting that small invisible thing was the kindest gift she could give him. For the first 10 minutes, everything was exactly right. Steph reached across the tablecloth and covered Aisha's hand with his. They talked quietly, about their children, about a trip they had been planning, about something funny that had happened at home that week. Aisha laughed again and pressed her fingers against his. They looked like exactly what they were. 2 people deeply in love, stealing a quiet moment inside a very loud life. Then their waitress arrived. Her name was Tanya Briggs, and the night was about to change. Tanya Briggs walked up to table 9 the way she had walked up to every table that night. Fast, efficient, eyes on the notepad. "You 2 ready, or do you need another minute?" she said. Not good evening. Not happy Valentine's Day. Not even a glance upward to acknowledge that 2 human beings were sitting in front of her. Just the words, flat and practiced, delivered to the general direction of the checkered tablecloth. Steph looked up. Aisha looked up. Tanya still had not made eye contact. "We'll probably need just a few more minutes," Steph said pleasantly. "We haven't had a chance to look at the menu yet." "I'll come back," Tanya said, and she was gone before he finished nodding. To understand what Tanya Briggs did that night, and why she did it, you cannot start at table 9. You have to start much earlier. You have to start in East Oakland, in a 2-bedroom house on 73rd Avenue, in the childhood of a girl who learned very young that the world did not slow down for tired people. Tanya was the second of 4 children raised by a woman named Deborah Briggs. Deborah was small in height and enormous in every other way. Tough, loving, funny on her good days, immovable on her hard ones. She worked days at a commercial laundry service on International Boulevard and evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. She was home by 10 most nights and up again by 5. She did this for years without complaint, which was its own kind of complaint, the kind that lives in silence and teaches children things that words never could. Tanya's father, Raymond Briggs, left the family when Tanya was 11 years old. He moved to Stockton and sent birthday cards that arrived late, when they arrived at all. He remarried when Tanya was 14. She found out through a cousin. He did not call to tell her himself. She learned early to expect nothing from people who had already shown her exactly who they were. She was sharp in school. Teachers used words like focused and driven in parent-teacher conferences, which Deborah attended alone, still in her work clothes, smelling faintly of industrial detergent. Tanya graduated from Castlemont High School in 2011, with grades good enough to earn a partial scholarship to San Francisco State University. She studied business administration. She had a plan, a real, specific, written-down plan that involved graduating, getting into restaurant management, and eventually running her own place someday. For 2 years, the plan held. Then Deborah got sick. The diagnosis came in the spring of Tanya's junior year. Type 2 diabetes with early-stage kidney complications. The kind of news that arrives quietly and then slowly fills every room in your life. Medical appointments, prescription costs, the particular bureaucratic exhaustion of fighting insurance companies for coverage that should have been automatic but never was. Tanya dropped to part-time classes. She picked up extra shifts, then more shifts, then full-time hours. She never went back to finish the degree. That had been 6 years ago. Now she was 29 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Tenderloin, the kind of neighborhood that San Francisco's tourism brochures politely left off the map, with a tabby cat named Biscuit and a kitchen counter that currently held, among other things, a notice from her landlord about a $340 monthly rent increase effective April 1st, a bill from her mother's nephrologist, and a request for money from her younger brother Marcus that she had been trying to figure out how to answer for 3 days. She sent money to her mother every month without fail. Not always the same amount, always something. It was the first bill she paid, before her own rent, before her phone, before anything else. She was not a bad person. She was an exhausted one. The specific, bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been carrying weight for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. On the morning of February 14, 2023, Valentine's Day, the most theatrical day of the restaurant calendar, 3 things happened before Tanya had even finished her first cup of coffee. The first was the rent notice, already described, which she found on the floor inside her front door at 6:15 a.m., slipped under by her landlord sometime in the night, like bad news always preferred to arrive, quietly, while you were sleeping. The second was Marcus's text. It came in at 6:47 a.m. "Hey T, I know timing is bad. I need $400. I'll pay you back, I promise. Please." She stared at the screen for a long time without responding. The third thing was the burned hand. She was making coffee at 7:10 a.m., distracted by the rent notice and Marcus's text, and the general weight of being herself on a Tuesday morning, and she grabbed the handle of the stovetop pot without the cloth she always kept beside it. The burn was not serious, a red welt across 3 fingers of her right hand, but it hurt sharply and immediately, and she spent 22 minutes running it under cold water at the kitchen sink, while Biscuit watched from the counter with the calm indifference that cats reserve for human suffering. The cold water made her late. Being late meant she was the last server to arrive for the pre-shift meeting. Being the last to arrive meant her shift manager, Derek Cole, noted her tardiness in the staff log in front of the whole team, which he did with the particular satisfaction of someone who enjoyed small institutional power. Derek was 24 years old. He had been the shift manager at Fielder's Table for 6 months. He had applied for the position 4 months after Tanya had applied for the exact same position and been told, by Greg Paulson, that the role had been filled internally. She had never been told why she didn't get it. She had her suspicions. She kept them to herself. She kept a lot of things to herself. She wrapped her burned hand in a bandage from the first aid kit in the break room, tied her apron strings, picked up her notepad, and walked out onto the floor. The early tables were manageable. She moved through them with the mechanical precision of someone who has done something so many times that the body does it alone, while the mind goes somewhere else entirely. Order taken, drink refilled, check delivered, tip pocketed. By 7 in the evening, the restaurant was packed, and the kitchen was running 20 minutes behind, and a man at table 4 had sent his steak back twice, cut it in half, eaten both halves, and then left $4 on a $62 bill. She was standing at the service station, bandaged hand curled around a pen, staring at that $4 tip, when Priya Vasquez appeared at her elbow. "Hey," Priya said, very quietly, in the tone of someone delivering sensitive information. "Table 9 just sat. They're kind of a big deal. Just thought you should know." Tanya looked across the restaurant. Table 9. A man in a cap, a woman in a red dress, talking quietly, looking out the window. "Big deal how?" Tanya said. Priya hesitated just a half-second too long. "Just be extra nice, okay?" Tanya looked at her with the flat expression of someone who had used up their last reserve of extra. "I'm always nice," she said. She picked up her notepad and walked toward table 9. She was not always nice. And tonight, she had nothing left to pretend with. She walked up to table 9 the way you walk toward something you are not really seeing. Fast, efficient. Notepad up. "You two ready, or do you need another minute?" she said. It was the same opening she used on every table. The same flat delivery. The same eyes that landed somewhere just above the actual human beings sitting in front of her. Close enough to seem like attention, far enough to avoid real contact. Steph looked up from his menu and smiled. "We'll probably need just a few more minutes, if that's okay. We haven't looked at the menu yet." "I'll come back," Tanya said, and she was gone. What happened next has been pieced together carefully from 3 separate accounts. Priya Vasquez at the hostess stand, a couple seated at table 11 who later posted about the evening on a private neighborhood forum, and Aisha Curry herself, who described the night in measured, deliberate detail during a podcast interview in the fall of 2023. Tanya did not come back in 2 minutes. She did not come back in 5. She did not come back for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is not a long time when you are waiting for a bus or standing in line at a grocery store or sitting through the last few minutes of a meeting that should have ended 20 minutes ago. 11 minutes is a very long time when you are sitting at a window table on Valentine's night with your spouse, trying to be invisible and ordinary and private, and the restaurant around you is humming with noise and movement and other people being attended to, and your water glass is empty, and nobody has looked your way once. Steph sat with his menu open. He read it slowly, the way people read things when they are filling time rather than actually gathering information. He already knew what he wanted. He had decided within the first 90 seconds. But the menu gave him something to look at that wasn't the table beside them being refilled with water, or the couple across the room receiving a bread basket with a warm smile, or the general choreography of a restaurant in full motion that somehow did not include Table 9. Aisha did not read the menu. She watched. Those who know Ayesha Curry describe her consistently in the same way: warm, direct, deeply intelligent, and equipped with the particular awareness of a woman who has spent years navigating spaces where people underestimate her. She is not someone who misses things. She is not someone who talks herself out of what she is clearly seeing in order to be polite. She turned her water glass upside down on the tablecloth. A universal signal. Empty. Nothing happened. "Are you noticing what I'm noticing?" she said to Steph quietly. Steph set his menu down. He looked at the upturned glass. He looked at the table beside them. A two-top that had arrived after them, already eating their appetizers, water glasses full and gleaming. "Let's just see how it goes," he said. That sentence, those 6 words, said something important about Steph Curry that no statistic has ever fully captured. He was a man who had spent 15 years in professional basketball being screamed at by opposing fans, elbowed by defenders twice his size, and publicly criticized by people who watched him play on television and believed that entitled them to an opinion on every dimension of his character. He had learned, somewhere in all of that, a particular kind of patience. Not the passive kind, not the doormat kind, the chosen kind. The kind that looks at a situation and decides, deliberately, to wait before deciding what it means. When Tanya finally returned, she did not acknowledge the wait. "No, sorry about that, or been a crazy night," or even the vague covering "what can I get for you folks" that servers use to move past uncomfortable gaps. She arrived at the table with her notepad already open and her pen already moving. "Ready now?" she said. Aisha looked at her with steady, careful eyes. "Could we get some water first? His glass has been empty." Tanya glanced at the upturned glass on the tablecloth. A flicker crossed her face. Not quite guilt, not quite irritation. Something smaller and harder to name that lived in the space between the two. "I'll send someone," she said. She did not send someone. She took their order. Steph asked for the barbecue pulled pork sandwich with a side of creamy coleslaw. Aisha ordered the seared salmon with a garden salad, and left without repeating anything back to confirm it, which was the kind of detail that separated a distracted server from a dismissive one. What happened next was the part that would later ignite the internet and end up printed in the kind of breathless online headlines that reduce complicated human moments to clean, outrage-ready sentences. 3 tables away from Table 9, a group of 6 had just been seated. They were loud in the easy, celebratory way of people who had already had a drink somewhere else before arriving. One of the women in the group was wearing a plastic tiara. They were clearly marking something: a birthday, an anniversary, some private reason to be joyful on a Tuesday in February. Tanya moved around that table like a completely different person. She refilled their water before the glasses were half empty. She laughed genuinely at something one of them said. She brought an extra bread basket without being asked, and set it down with a "There you go, guys," that landed warm and easy. She checked on them twice in the span of 15 minutes. Steph watched all of this without expression. He had been in public long enough to develop a precise internal instrument for distinguishing between the ordinary friction of a busy restaurant. Servers pulled in 6 directions, kitchens behind, managers hovering, and something more specific, more directed, the particular quality of being looked through rather than overlooked. This felt specific. He did not say anything about it. But the water still had not come. 31 minutes after they had ordered, the food arrived, carried not by Tanya but by Elijah Torres, the food runner, a quiet 18-year-old who set the plates down with practiced care and gave them a brief nod before disappearing back toward the kitchen. Steph looked at his plate. The coleslaw was wrong. It was thin and sharp-smelling, vinegar-based, the tangy kind that came in a deli container and had its place in the world, but was not what the chalkboard menu had clearly listed as creamy house coleslaw. It was a small thing. It was also not what he ordered. He caught Tanya's eye as she passed, gently, not dramatically, a simple raised hand, and when she stopped beside the table, he pointed to the coleslaw quietly. "I think this might be the wrong one," he said, still smiling, still calm. The menu listed creamy coleslaw. "This looks like the vinegar style." Tanya looked at the plate. She looked at him. "That's the coleslaw we serve," she said. "The chalkboard says creamy," Steph said. "Evenly. No edge in it. The menu's been updated," Tanya said. "That's what we have." She walked away. Aisha put her fork down on the edge of her plate, with a small, precise click. "Stephen," she said. He was already reaching for the coleslaw. "I know," he said. He ate it without another word. That small act, a man choosing silence over confrontation, choosing to consume something wrong rather than make a scene about it, would later become one of the most discussed details of the entire story. People online would split almost perfectly down the middle about what it meant. Half would say it was grace. The other half would say it was the behavior of a man who had been so thoroughly disrespected that he had simply stopped expecting anything better. Both groups, in their own way, were probably right. The meal continued in the muted, careful way that meals continue when something unspoken has settled over a table like weather. Aisha ate her salmon. Steph finished his sandwich. They talked, because they were the kind of couple who could always find something to talk about, who had built 20 years of friendship underneath the marriage and could reach for it even on difficult evenings. But the ease of the earlier conversation had changed its texture slightly, the way a room changes after a door slams somewhere else in the house. Nobody refilled their water. They had been at Fielder's table for almost an hour when the boy appeared. He came from the direction of table 7, moving with the particular hesitation of a child who has been told all his life to be polite and is now trying to reconcile that instruction with something he wants very badly. He was 9 years old, maybe 10, small for his age, with wide brown eyes and a paper placemat from the restaurant rolled loosely in one hand like a scroll. His father stood 5 steps behind him near the edge of the aisle, hands in his jacket pockets, wearing the expression of a parent who has made a judgment call and is no longer certain it was the right one. The boy stopped at the edge of table 9. He looked at Steph Curry. Steph looked back at him. "Mr. Curry?" The boy's voice came out barely above a whisper, as if he was afraid that speaking too loudly might make the whole thing disappear. "I'm really sorry to bother you. You're my favorite player. You're my favorite player ever." The table beside them had gone quiet. Then the table beside that one. It moved through the restaurant in a slow, outward ripple, the particular silence of a room full of people who have all just realized the same thing at the same moment. Steph did not look around at any of it. He looked only at the boy. "What's your name, man?" He said. "Josiah," the boy said. He straightened slightly when he said it, the way children do when an adult asks their name like it genuinely matters. "You play ball, Josiah?" Josiah nodded quickly. "Point guard, but I'm not very good yet." Steph leaned forward on his elbows, closing the distance between them. "You know what? Neither was I at your age. You want to know a secret?" Josiah nodded again, eyes enormous. "The guys who get good the fastest are never the ones with the most talent," Steph said. "They're the ones who fall in love with practice before they fall in love with winning. Can you do that?" "I think so," Josiah said. "I know so," Steph said. "I can tell just by looking at you." He took the paper placemat from Josiah's hand. He borrowed a pen from the table and signed it. Not just a signature, but a full message, written carefully in the margin, that Josiah's father would later say his son read every morning before school. He handed it back. He gave Josiah a fist bump that the boy would describe to every person he knew for the next 6 months. Josiah's father stepped forward and mouthed a silent thank you over his son's head. Steph nodded. The whole exchange lasted 4 minutes. The dining room, which had gone quiet to watch it, slowly returned to itself. All except one person. Tanya Briggs was standing at the service station with her back to the room, restocking the condiment rack. She had not seen Josiah approach. She had not seen the placemat, or the message, or the fist bump. She had not seen the ripple of silence move through the restaurant, or the way it settled back down into warmth. She had missed the whole thing. She turned around just as Josiah was walking back to his table, placemat clutched to his chest like something precious. She registered the general shift in the room's mood without understanding it. 15 minutes later, she placed the check face down on the edge of table 9 without asking if they wanted dessert. Without asking if everything had been okay. Without any of the standard closing choreography that signals to a table that they have been cared for, even minimally, even as a professional formality. Just the check, placed and left. Steph picked it up. He looked at it for a moment. $87.40. 2 entrees, 2 drinks. At the bottom of the itemized list, a slice of the golden skillet brownie had been listed under a column marked complimentary, and then billed at $8.50 beneath it, which was not what the word complimentary meant, but which Steph did not mention. He put his card down. Aisha looked at him across the table. "You're going to tip her," she said. It was not quite a question. "I always tip," he said. "Stephen." Her voice was quiet and measured. "She ignored us for most of an hour. She argued with you about coleslaw. She never brought the water." "I know," he said. "Oh, so why?" "Because my dad tipped everyone," he said simply. "Even when the service was hard. He said the tip wasn't a grade. It was a statement about who you were, not who they were." Aisha was quiet for a moment. "Del Curry was a better man than most," she said finally. "He was," Steph agreed. He wrote $50 on the tip line of an $87 check and signed his name at the bottom. The same signature he had put on Josiah's placemat 40 minutes earlier, for entirely different reasons and with exactly the same intention behind both. He stood, helped Aisha with her jacket, and they moved toward the door. As they passed the service station, Tanya was there, back to the room, pen moving across a notepad. Something made her look up as they passed. Some peripheral awareness, the particular quality of a presence that is hard to ignore, even when it is trying to be ignored. She looked at the man in the olive green jacket. She looked at him the way you look at a face that almost matches a memory, familiar in a way you cannot immediately source. The face you have seen somewhere important but cannot place. The feeling lasted 2 seconds. The restaurant was loud. Another table needed her. She turned back to her notepad. At the door, Priya caught Steph's eye. She looked pained in the way of someone who has witnessed something and feels responsible for it. She opened her mouth slightly. Steph shook his head. Gently. "It was okay. It was fine." "Great restaurant," he said quietly. "Really good food." Priya nodded, grateful and a little undone. Outside on Stewart Street, the bay air was cold and clean, and the bridge was still beautiful. Aisha took his arm. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah," he said. And then, after a long moment walking, "She's tired." Aisha looked at him. "I know that kind of tired," he said. "The kind that gets into your hands before your brain catches up." "She's carrying something heavy." Aisha was quiet for 3 full steps. "I left a note," she said finally. He looked at her. $20, and a note that said, "We hope your night gets better." She paused. "That was the absolute best I could do tonight, Stephen. I want you to know that I tried." He laughed, deep and real, the kind that came from somewhere that the bad parts of the evening hadn't reached, and they walked together into the cold February night. Behind them, inside Fielder's table, a waitress named Tanya Briggs picked up a $50 tip from a checkered tablecloth and did not yet know what it meant. She would. Just not tonight. Tonight, the $50 went into Tanya's apron pocket alongside the other tips from the evening. a decent enough haul for a Valentine's shift, though not the extraordinary one the holiday usually promised. She counted it in the break room after close, standing under the fluorescent light with her coat already on, Biscuit waiting at home, the rent notice still on the counter. She did not think about Table 9, she thought about Marcus. She thought about whether $400 was something she could move around if she was creative with the timing of her other payments. She thought about her mother's next appointment, which was the following Thursday, and whether Deborah would need a ride or could manage the bus. She turned off the break room light and walked home through the cold. For 12 days, nothing happened. Then, everything happened at once. On February 26, 2023, a gossip and sports culture blog called The Buzzer Beat published a short post with a blurry photograph attached. The photo had been taken inside Fielder's table on Valentine's night by another diner. Someone seated 2 tables away who had recognized Steph and Aisha midway through the evening and taken a single discreet shot on their phone, then sat on it for nearly 2 weeks before deciding to send it in. The post was 4 sentences long. It said that Golden State Warriors star Stephen Curry had been spotted dining at a San Francisco restaurant on Valentine's Day, and that multiple sources inside the establishment described the service he received as notably cold and borderline dismissive. It named the restaurant. It did not name the waitress. That omission lasted approximately 11 hours. By the following morning, February 27th, the internet had done what the internet does, with the focused, relentless efficiency of a machine, built specifically for this purpose. The restaurant had been identified. The staff list had been cross-referenced with review sites and social media profiles. 3 separate accounts on Twitter, now rebranded as X, posted Tanya's full name alongside the original Buzzer Beat story, each post framing her differently, but all arriving at the same destination. The comments were not kind. Within 48 hours, the story had been picked up by 4 sports blogs, 2 celebrity gossip sites, and a segment on a morning radio show in the Bay Area that described the incident in terms that were both inaccurate in their details and entirely accurate in their outrage. By the time the segment aired, Fielder's Table had received over 1,400 one-star reviews on Google and Yelp combined. Almost none of them were about the food. They were about Tanya. They used her name. They used language that had long since left the territory of customer feedback and entered something uglier and harder to describe. The particular cruelty of strangers who have decided, from the distance of a screen and a 4-sentence blog post, that they understand a person completely. Tanya found out on the morning of February 27th. She was still in bed when her phone began moving, with the specific, relentless vibration of a device receiving more notifications than it was designed to process at once. She picked it up half asleep and looked at the screen and saw her own name, her own face. A photograph she recognized from her personal Facebook page, one she had posted 2 years ago at a friend's birthday dinner, laughing at something, mouth wide open, completely unguarded, now attached to a story that had been shared over 200,000 times. She sat up. She read the original post. Then she read the comments. She made it through 47 of them before she put the phone face down on the mattress and sat very still in the gray morning light, with her hands flat on her knees. Biscuit jumped onto the bed and pushed his head against her arm. She did not move. She had given bad service on a bad night. She knew that. She had known it somewhere in the back of herself, even before she counted that $50 tip and felt the specific discomfort of generosity you have not earned. She had been short and cold and inattentive to 2 people who had done nothing to deserve it except sit at one of her tables, on a night when she had nothing left to give. She knew that, but she had not known it would become this. She had not known that a bad night could be excavated and displayed and handed to strangers like evidence in a case she had never been told she was standing trial for. At 9:15 a.m., her phone rang. It was Greg Paulson. "Can you come in?" he said, not for a shift, just to talk. She came in at 11. She sat across from Greg in his small back office in the plastic chair that always sat at a slight angle, because one leg was shorter than the others. He looked tired, in a way that suggested he had not slept well either. "I need you to understand the position this puts me in," he said. He was not angry. She had worked for Greg long enough to know the difference between his angry voice and his pained one. This was the pained one. "I didn't do anything wrong," Tanya said. Her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when a person is working very hard to keep them that way. "I gave them service. I wasn't rude, I wasn't—" "Tanya." He slid his phone across the desk. On the screen was a Yelp review written by someone who identified themselves as a fellow diner that night. It described the 11-minute wait, the coleslaw exchange, the unreplaced water. The moment Tanya stood at the service station with her back turned, while a little boy named Josiah held out a placemat to one of the most famous athletes in the world. She read every word. Her jaw tightened. Not in defensiveness. In recognition. "I didn't know who he was," she said quietly. Greg leaned back in his chair. "That's not actually the problem," he said, gently enough that it landed harder than if he had said it sharply. "You would have given that same service to anyone. That's what people are saying." The room was very quiet. The kitchen was running prep sounds through the wall. Knives on boards, a pan sliding, someone calling out an order. The sounds of a restaurant continuing its business, while one of its people sat in a tilted chair and felt the specific weight of being seen clearly and not liking the reflection. She did not have an answer for what Greg had said. Because it was true. She placed Tanya on a 2-week paid suspension effective immediately, pending a review by the restaurant group's operations team. He said he hoped things would settle down. He said the restaurant stood behind its staff. He said a lot of careful, decent things. None of them touched the part of her that was already somewhere else entirely, already back in her apartment, already dreading the call she knew was coming. Her mother had a neighbor named Gloria who spent considerable time on Facebook. Gloria had almost certainly already seen the story, which meant Deborah Briggs had almost certainly already seen the story, which meant the phone was going to ring. She was halfway home when it did. The call came at 12:34 p.m. on a Tuesday, while Tanya was walking west on Market Street, with her hood up and her suspended apron folded in her bag, and the cold February air pressing against her face like a hand. She saw her mother's name on the screen and stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk, people parting around her like water around a stone. She answered on the third ring. "Baby," her mother said, just that one word. And in it, the entire architecture of Deborah Briggs, the woman who had worked 2 jobs for 20 years without complaint, who had raised 4 children on the salary of someone who cleaned other people's messes, who had never once asked the world for softness, but had always, quietly, given it to her children when she could. In that one word was all of that, and something underneath it that Tanya recognized immediately. Disappointment, the gentle kind. The kind that hurt precisely because it came without anger. "Mama," Tanya said. "Gloria showed me the computer this morning," Deborah said. Her voice was careful and unhurried, the way it always was when she was saying something important. "She showed me the article, and the picture." Tanya closed her eyes. Around her, Market Street continued its loud, indifferent business. "Is it true?" Deborah asked. "Were you unkind to those people?" "I didn't know who they were," Tanya said. "I didn't recognize him. I was just—" "That's not what I asked you," Deborah said softly. The sentence landed with the precision of something her mother had always been able to do. Cut directly to the only question that actually mattered, and wait there patiently until you caught up to it. Tanya stood on Market Street with her eyes still closed and thought about the upturned water glass. The coleslaw she had defended without checking. The back she had turned at the service station while something good was happening behind her that she had been too tired and too armored to be present for. "I was having a bad day," she said finally, "and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it." The line was quiet for a long moment. A bus went past. A man on a bicycle swerved around Tanya without looking at her. The city kept moving. "That's not who I raised you to be," Deborah said. "I know, Mama." They stayed on the phone without speaking for almost a full minute, just the sound of each other's breathing across the distance between the Tenderloin and East Oakland. 2 miles and a world apart, and no miles apart at all. "Come home this weekend," Deborah said finally. "I'll make the rice the way you like it." "Okay," Tanya said. She hung up and stood on the sidewalk for another moment before she started walking again. She did not cry. She had learned young that crying on public streets in San Francisco was something the city neither noticed nor accommodated, and she had trained herself out of the habit. But something had shifted. Not broken, shifted. The specific internal movement of a person who has been confronted with a true thing and has stopped arguing with it. She went home. She fed Biscuit. She sat on the edge of her bed with the rent notice on the counter, and Marcus's unanswered text still on her phone, and the 2-week suspension stretching ahead of her like empty road. She did not know that 20 miles away, in a quiet office in the financial district, a phone call was already being made. She did not know that someone had been watching the story unfold from a particular vantage point, one that gave them a view of it that nobody else in the public conversation possessed. She did not know that her employee file at Fielder's table had been requested and read in full by someone who had every reason to let the story die, and had chosen, for reasons she would not understand for several more weeks, to do the opposite. On March 6, 2023, 20 days after Valentine's night, a man named Calvin Reese called Fielder's table. Calvin was 53 years old and had spent the better part of 3 decades in restaurant operations. He had a measured, unhurried voice, and the habit, which his colleagues had noted for years, of pausing before he said anything significant, a small but reliable signal that the next thing out of his mouth had been considered carefully and would not be taken back. He was the senior operations director for a private hospitality group called Bridgeline Hospitality LLC, headquartered in a modest suite on California Street in the financial district. Bridgeline had been operating quietly in the Bay Area restaurant market since 2019, acquiring mid-market American dining establishments with the patient, deliberate approach of a company that was not in a hurry and did not need to be. They liked restaurants with character, wood-paneled walls, chalkboard menus, the kind of places where the food was real and the lighting was warm and nobody was trying to impress anyone. They had acquired 4 such establishments in 4 years, and they had not advertised a single acquisition. Calvin called Greg Paulson directly and told him that a corporate representative would be visiting Fielder's table within the week for a standard operational review. Greg said fine. He had been through these before. He asked if there was anything specific he should prepare. Calvin said no, just normal operations, normal staff, normal day. He did not mention that the review had been directly requested by one of Bridgeline's principal investors in response to the Valentine's night media story. He did not mention that the investor had made the request personally, not through a lawyer, not through an assistant, personally. 3 days later, on the afternoon of March 9th, a woman walked into Fielder's table during the quiet hour between the lunch rush and the dinner setup. She sat at the bar, ordered a black coffee, and spent the next 90 minutes doing what she did better than almost anyone Calvin Reese had ever worked with. She watched. She listened. She asked questions that sounded casual and weren't. Her name was Diane Whitfield. She was 51 years old, originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and she had spent 25 years consulting for hospitality groups across the country. She had a small notebook and a way of making people feel comfortable enough to tell her things they had not planned to say. Elijah Torres, the food runner, talked to her for 20 minutes about the general culture of the floor. Priya Vasquez talked to her for 30 minutes about the night of February 14th, in specific, careful detail, including the moment she had tried to warn Tanya and the way Tanya had looked at her when she said, "I'm always nice." Then Diane went into Greg Paulson's office and closed the door. "Tell me about Tanya Briggs," she said. Greg looked at her steadily. He was not a man who was easily read, but something in Diane's question, the directness of it, the way it went straight to the person rather than the incident, made him sit forward. "She's one of the hardest workers I've ever managed," he said. 3 years here, never missed a shift without notice. Knows the menu better than the kitchen does." He paused. "She's going through some hard stuff personally. I don't think that excuses what happened. But I don't think it defines her either." Diane wrote something in her notebook. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Does she know," Diane said, looking up from the page, "who the primary investor of this restaurant group actually is?" Greg blinked slowly. "She knows the Bridgeline name. We've never disclosed anything beyond—" "Does she know the name behind the name?" Diane said. Greg paused for a long moment. "No," he said. "Nobody on the floor does." Diane closed her notebook. "I see," she said quietly. What Greg Paulson did not know, what Tanya Briggs did not know, what the 200,000 people who had shared the buzzer-beat story did not know, was what was written on the original Bridgeline Hospitality LLC founding documents, filed in 2019 with the California Secretary of State. Under the section marked Principal Investors, listed third, behind 2 Bay Area private equity firms, was 4 letters and 2 numbers. SC Thready Inc. SC Thready Inc. was the personal business and investment company of Stephen Curry. The man at table 9, the man whose water glass had sat empty and upturned for the better part of an hour, whose coleslaw had been wrong and whose correction had been dismissed, who had turned his back on a scene to sign a placemat for a boy named Josiah while his waitress stood at a station restocking ketchup bottles, was, in a very real and legal and documented sense, a part owner of the restaurant where Tanya Briggs had worked for 3 years. He had known this when he walked in. He had said nothing. He had eaten the coleslaw, left the $50, told his wife she was tired, and then, quietly, without a single public word, he had sent Diane Whitfield to find out who she really was. The question now was what he intended to do with the answer. Tanya did not know the question existed. She spent the first week of her suspension doing the things that people do when they have been suddenly removed from the structure that held their days together and have not yet figured out what to replace it with. She cleaned her apartment with the thorough, slightly desperate energy of someone who needs to feel productive, without actually knowing what to produce. She reorganized her kitchen cabinets. She took Biscuit to the vet for a checkup that was 3 months overdue. She went to her mother's house in East Oakland on Saturday and ate the rice Deborah made the way she liked it, with the sofrito cooked down until it was almost a paste, the way her grandmother had taught, and sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours without once checking her phone. Being at her mother's house was the only place the week felt manageable. On Sunday, she drove back to the Tenderloin and sat in the parking spot behind her building for 11 minutes before she went inside. Not because she was going anywhere, just because the inside of the car was one of the few places she could be completely alone without it feeling like punishment. The second week was harder. The online story had largely moved on by then, the internet's attention span being what it was. Something newer and more outrageous had come along to absorb the crowd. But the residue remained. The 1-star reviews were still there. Her name was still attached to them. If you typed her name into a search engine, which she had made the mistake of doing once on a Thursday evening, the first 4 results were all variations of the same story. She stopped typing her own name into search engines. She started taking longer walks instead. Through Alamo Square Park in the mornings when the fog was still low over the Painted Ladies. Along Divisadero Street in the afternoons. stopping at a bakery she liked for a coffee she technically could not afford. She walked the way people walk when they are trying to outpace something that has no legs but keeps up anyway. She was on one of those walks, heading east on Hayes Street on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of March, hands in her jacket pockets, watching the sidewalk more than the street, when her phone rang. 415 area code, San Francisco number, no name attached. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had been letting most unknown numbers go to voicemail since the story broke, having learned that strangers with opinions were persistent dialers. But something made her answer, the particular restlessness of a person who has been waiting for something without knowing what it is. "Is this Tanya Briggs?" said a woman's voice. Warm, measured, the voice of someone who called people with difficult information regularly and had learned how to carry it gently. "Yes," Tanya said. She stopped walking. "My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm a consultant working with Bridgeline Hospitality. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Tanya's first thought was immediate and specific. "Am I fired?" "No," Diane said, and the warmth in her voice made the word feel like something you could lean against. "You are absolutely not fired. I'd actually like to meet with you in person, if you're open to it. I have some information about your employment situation, and about the restaurant itself, that I think you'll want to hear directly rather than over the phone." Tanya stood on Hayes Street with the afternoon fog beginning its slow crawl in from the bay. A woman walked past her with a stroller. A man unlocked a bicycle from a street pole. The city moved around her in its ordinary way, indifferent to the fact that something was shifting. "What kind of information?" Tanya said carefully. "The kind," Diane said, after one of her precise pauses, "that reframes everything." They met 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, at a coffee shop on Valencia Street, in the Mission District called Ritual Coffee Roasters. A long, narrow space, with exposed brick walls and high windows that let the morning light in at an angle that made everything look more significant than it probably was. Tanya arrived 8 minutes early, which she always did when something felt important. She ordered a tea. She had switched from coffee during the suspension, finding that her nerves did not need the assistance, and chose a table near the back wall where she could see the door. She sat with her good jacket on, the dark navy one, her hands wrapped around the mug, watching the door with the focused stillness of someone preparing for something they cannot fully prepare for. Diane arrived exactly on time. She was smaller than Tanya had imagined from the phone call, compact and precise, with natural gray threaded through dark hair and the kind of steady, unhurried eyes that made you feel, within the first 30 seconds of meeting her, that she was genuinely interested in what you had to say and would not be rushed past the parts that mattered. She sat down. She ordered a black coffee. She set her notebook on the table but did not open it immediately. "I want to start by telling you something," she said. "That is not meant as a judgment. It is simply context that I think you deserve to have." Tanya nodded. Her hands tightened slightly around the mug. "Do you know who the principal investor is behind Bridgeline Hospitality?" Diane asked. "It's a corporate group," Tanya said. "I know the name. I don't know the people behind it." Diane looked at her with the steady, careful expression of someone who is about to hand a person something heavy and wants to make sure they are ready to hold it. "The restaurant where you have worked for the past 3 years," she said, "is partly owned, through an investment company called SC30 Inc., by Stephen Curry." The coffee shop was playing something quiet and instrumental through its speakers. 2 men at the table beside them were debating something about a renovation project. The morning light came through the high windows at its significant angle. Tanya did not move. "The man at table 9, Diane said gently, was, in a very real sense, one of your employers." The silence that followed was the particular kind that does not feel empty. It felt full, overfull, of every image from that night, arriving simultaneously and rearranging themselves into a new configuration, that changed what each of them meant. The upturned water glass, the coleslaw, the back she had turned, the $50 tip. He didn't know you were his employee, Diane continued, her voice careful and even. He came in anonymously, as he sometimes does, wanting a private evening. He had no intention of using his ownership, no intention of making himself known. She paused. And when the media story broke, when he had every opportunity and considerable justification to simply step back and let the public reaction run its course, he chose not to. Tanya's eyes were very still. The mug had gone warm in her hands rather than hot. "He asked us to look into your situation," Diane said. "Not to build a case, not to prepare a response, to understand who you were." She reached into her bag and placed a folded piece of paper on the table between them. "He'd like you to read this," she said. "Take whatever time you need." Tanya looked at the folded paper for a moment before she reached for it. Her hand, she noticed distantly, was the one that had been burned on Valentine's morning. The welt had faded to a faint mark. She had not thought about the burn in days. She had been too busy thinking about everything that came after it. She unfolded the paper. It was a letter, handwritten, on simple cream stationery, in the careful, unhurried script of someone who had written it more than once before they were satisfied with it. At the top, in the same handwriting as everything that followed, were 2 words. "Dear Tanya." She began to read. "And the coffee shop, and Valencia Street outside its windows, and the city of San Francisco with all its noise and fog and relentless forward motion, went completely quiet around her." She read slowly. Tanya Briggs was not a slow reader. She had always moved through text quickly, efficiently, the way she moved through most things, with the forward momentum of someone who had learned early that lingering cost time she did not have. But she read this letter slowly. The way you read something when you understand, within the first few lines, that speed would be a kind of waste. It began simply. "Dear Tanya, I don't write this because I need an apology. I write this because I think you deserve more than the life you've been given the chance to have so far." She stopped after the first 2 sentences. "Read them again," continued. He wrote about his father first. Del Curry had played 16 seasons in the NBA. For the Charlotte Hornets, the Utah Jazz, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Toronto Raptors, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, and had retired in 2002 without ever having won a championship ring, which was a fact that the basketball world noted, and Del himself had never appeared to lose sleep over. What Del had won, Steph wrote, was something harder to quantify and more durable than hardware. He had won the loyalty of every person who had ever worked around him: equipment managers, bus drivers, hotel staff, restaurant servers in a dozen cities across 20 years of road trips. Steph wrote about a specific memory. He was 8 years old, sitting in a restaurant in Charlotte with his father after a home game. The service had been slow and the server had been distracted, and had gotten his father's order wrong twice. On the way out, Del had left a tip that was larger than the bill. Steph had asked him why. Del had looked at his son with the particular patience of a man who understood that the best lessons needed to be delivered without drama to stick properly. "That woman is tired," Del had said. "And tired people deserve grace more than rested ones do. Remember that." Steph wrote that he had remembered it every day since. He wrote then about the night at Fielder's table. He did not soften it or dress it in euphemism. He said the service had been unkind. He said sitting at a table and being looked through, not overlooked, but looked through, as if your presence registered as less than a full human inconvenience, had stung in a way that surprised him, because he had thought he was past being surprised by that particular feeling. He wrote that Aisha had handled the evening with more grace than he had managed internally, which was frequently the case, and which he had long ago stopped being embarrassed about. But then the letter turned. It turned the way good letters turn, not with a however or a but, not with the pivot of someone building toward a point they had planned from the beginning, but with the genuine shift of a person who had sat with something long enough to see it from the other side. "I've had nights," he wrote, "when the pressure of being watched made me smaller instead of bigger. Early in my career, when the doubts were loudest, I played badly, and I treated people badly, and I told myself it was the circumstances when it was actually just me, choosing the worst version of myself because it was the easiest one to reach for. The difference between those nights and who I eventually became is not talent. It's not discipline. It is simply that someone chose to invest in me instead of writing me off. A coach, a trainer, my father, people who looked at my worst moments and decided they were not the whole story." Tanya's eyes moved across the page without stopping now. "I have read your file. I know about your mother's illness and what it cost you. I know about the degree you left unfinished at San Francisco State. I know about the management position you applied for and did not receive. And I want you to know that I have looked into the circumstances of that decision, and I was not satisfied with what I found." She looked up briefly at that line, looked back down. "I know about the rent notice. I know about Marcus." She exhaled slowly through her nose. She had still not asked how he knew about Marcus. She was not sure she needed to. Some things, she was learning, were less important than the fact of them. "I am not writing to offer you charity," the letter continued. "I want to be very precise about that, because I think you would recognize charity and reject it, and I think that instinct is one of the most valuable things about you. What I am writing to offer you is an investment, the same kind that was made in me. The kind that says, I see what you are capable of, and I am willing to put something real behind that belief." Then he listed 3 things. He offered her the return of her position at Fielder's table, with no disciplinary notation attached to the February 14th incident, effective whenever she was ready. He said the online story had run its course. He said her job had always been hers. He offered to fund her return to San Francisco State University through the SC30 Foundation, the charitable organization he had established in 2011 that had since invested millions of dollars in educational programs for Bay Area youth and returning adult students. Full tuition, no conditions beyond enrollment, and honest effort. He offered her, upon completion of her degree, a guaranteed interview for a junior operations management role within Bridgeline Hospitality. Not a guaranteed position, he was careful about that distinction, but a guaranteed interview, for a real role, for which she would by then be fully qualified, evaluated on her merits by people who had been instructed to look at nothing that had happened before the day she walked in the door. The letter was 3 pages long. She had reached the bottom of the 3rd page. There were 2 postscripts. The first read, P.S. I looked up the coleslaw. The kitchen changed the recipe in January, and the printed menu was never updated. You were technically correct. I have spoken to Greg about this. It will not happen again. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a sob, but lived precisely in the territory between the two. The second postscript was written in smaller, slightly different handwriting, the handwriting of someone who had added it after folding and unfolding the page at least once, as if they had walked away and come back. P.P.S. Tell Marcus the answer is probably still no, but I hope things look up for him soon. She put the letter down on the table. She pressed both hands flat against the wood surface, on either side of it, the way a person steadies themselves against something solid when the ground has shifted beneath them. Diane was watching her quietly, both hands around her coffee cup, waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that there was no useful thing to say in a moment like this, and that the most respectful thing you could offer another person's reckoning was simply to stay present inside it, without rushing it toward its conclusion. Tanya looked at the letter, then at the window, then at her own hands. The burn mark on her right hand had almost entirely faded now. In another week it would be gone completely. The skin was already smooth where the welt had been. New skin, softer than what had been there before. the way skin always comes back after a burn. Tenderer, more aware of itself, she picked up the letter. She folded it along its original creases, with the careful, deliberate movements of someone handling something they intend to keep. When she looked up at Diane, her eyes were wet in the particular way of someone who has been crying without deciding to, the involuntary kind, the kind that arrives not from sadness but from the sudden, disorienting experience of being seen completely, without armor, by someone who had every reason to look away. "I need a minute," she said. "Take all the time you need," Diane said. She took 4 minutes. She sat with the folded letter in her hands, and Biscuit waiting at home, and her mother's voice from the phone call still somewhere in her chest, and 3 pages of handwriting from a man she had served vinegar coleslaw to on Valentine's Day and never once looked at directly. Then she looked at Diane. "I accept," she said. "All 3. Her voice was steady, not the performed steadiness of earlier in the suspension, the kind she had held herself in through sheer will. This was different. This was the steadiness of someone who has just been handed a foundation and is already, quietly, beginning to build. She walked home from Ritual Coffee Roasters through the Mission District with the letter folded inside her jacket pocket, pressed against her chest. Not because she was being dramatic about it, simply because she was not ready to put it in her bag yet, where it would sit alongside receipts and lip balm and her transit card. It needed, for now, to be somewhere more deliberate than that. She called her mother from the sidewalk on 24th Street, standing outside a panaderia that had its doors propped open, the smell of fresh bread drifting out onto the street like an invitation. "Mama," she said when Deborah answered. "You sound different," Deborah said immediately. "Mothers always knew." "Something happened," Tanya said. "Something good. I'll explain everything on Sunday." There was a pause on the line. Then Deborah Briggs, who had worked 2 jobs for 20 years and raised 4 children and never once asked the world for more than it gave her, said the only thing she ever said when one of her children told her something good was coming. "I'll make the rice," she said. Tanya returned to Fielder's table on a Monday morning, in late March 2023. She had rehearsed, on the walk over, what she would say when she walked back through the door. She had considered and discarded several versions of an opening, something that acknowledged what had happened without making it the first thing in the room, something that was honest without being theatrical. She did not need any of them. Priya Vasquez was at the hostess stand when Tanya came through the door. She looked up, and her face did the thing that young people's faces do when they feel something genuine and have not yet learned to manage it. It simply showed what it felt. Relief. Plain and uncomplicated. "Good," Priya said. "You're back. It's been an absolute disaster without you." Elijah Torres looked up from the table he was resetting near the window. He extended a fist without a word. Tanya bumped it. She put on her apron. She picked up her notepad. She walked to her first table of the morning, a couple in their 60s, sharing a pot of tea and a newspaper, unbothered and unhurried, and she looked at them directly when she arrived. Full eye contact. Present. "Good morning," she said. "Welcome in. Take all the time you need." It was a small thing. It was also entirely different from the way she had walked up to tables before. Not performed, not compensatory, just genuine, the natural expression of a person who had recently been looked at with care and had learned, from the experience, how to offer it back. She was different in the way that mattered, the way that happens not from trying, but from being changed by something real. She started at San Francisco State University in the fall semester of 2023, enrolling in 2 evening classes a week, business communications and organizational management. She took the BART from 16th Street Mission Station to the Daly City stop and walked the rest of the way, 20 minutes each direction, in all weather. Her mother drove up from Oakland for orientation day. She cried in the parking lot afterward, quietly, with her sunglasses on, the way Deborah Briggs cried, without making it anyone else's business. Tanya pretended not to notice. Then she reached over and held her mother's hand for the drive back to Bart. By the spring of 2024, she was taking 4 classes a semester and had been asked by Greg Paulson to help coordinate scheduling for the floor staff. An unofficial promotion that came without a title change, but with a quiet, significant increase in responsibility that she handled without drawing attention to it. Derek Cole, the shift manager, had left Fielder's Table in January of 2024 to take a position at a restaurant in Marin County. His departure was not discussed at length by anyone on the floor. By the summer of 2024, Tanya's story had found its way into a community magazine called The Bay Standard, a small, well-regarded publication that covered neighborhood life and local human interest stories with the care that larger outlets rarely afforded them. The journalist who interviewed Tanya was a woman named Celeste Huang, and she spent 3 hours with Tanya at Fielder's Table on a slow Tuesday afternoon, asking questions with the kind of patience that made people say things they had not planned to say. The piece ran in the August 2024 issue under the headline, "Second Chances and the People Who Actually Give Them." It did not name Steph Curry. At Tanya's specific request, she had asked Diane to pass that request along, and Diane had, and the answer that came back was a single sentence relayed through Diane during a brief phone call. He said, "That's exactly right." In the interview, when Celeste Huang asked Tanya what she would say to her 29-year-old self, the one with the burned hand and the rent notice, and the bad day that had spilled onto 2 people who did not deserve it, Tanya was quiet for a long time before she answered. Long enough that Celeste looked up from her recorder. "I would tell her," Tanya said finally, "that being tired is real. Being broke is real. Being angry at a world that has asked more of you than it has given back. That is real. But those things are not permissions. They are tests. And you don't always pass them." She paused. "But the test doesn't disappear just because you failed it once. It comes back. And if you're lucky, if you are genuinely, extraordinarily lucky, it comes back, carried by someone who believes you can pass it the second time." She looked at the table for a moment. "Someone made sure it came back for me," she said. "Not everyone gets that. I try to remember that every single day." She has kept her word. Every day since that Saturday morning on Valencia Street, when she unfolded 3 pages of careful handwriting and felt the ground shift beneath her, Tanya Briggs has remembered. Not in the performative way of someone who has been taught a lesson and wants credit for having learned it. In the quiet, private way of someone who carries a debt they know they can never fully repay and have decided, instead, to pay forward. She remembers it when a table is difficult, when a customer is short with her, when the kitchen is behind and the floor is full and her feet hurt and she has been on shift for 7 hours, and someone at table 4 sends something back without saying please. She remembers the upturned water glass. She remembers what it costs to be on the wrong side of a person's exhaustion, and she chooses differently. This is the thing about Steph Curry, that the statistics, the 3,747 career three-pointers he had made by the end of the 2024-25 NBA season, the 4 championship rings, the 2 MVP awards, the unanimous selection as one of the 75 greatest players in NBA history, do not fully capture. He grew up watching his father treat every person in every room as if their dignity was non-negotiable. He entered the NBA as an undersized kid from Davidson College, whom scouts doubted and defenders underestimated, and whose ankles were described in draft reports as a significant liability. He was told, in various ways and by various people, that he was not quite enough. He became the greatest shooter the game has ever seen, not despite those things, alongside them, and somewhere in all of it, in the years of being doubted, in the lessons absorbed at a restaurant table in Charlotte at age 8, in 16 seasons of watching Del Curry tip generously in cities across America, he developed a philosophy that never made a press conference, but lived in everything he did, when nobody was watching. That the people who have the fewest reasons to extend grace are the ones whose grace means the most. That a bad moment is not a final verdict. That how you treat someone who has just given you their worst is the truest measure of your best. On February 14, 2023, a tired woman in a San Francisco restaurant gave Steph Curry her worst without knowing who he was. He ate the coleslaw. He left the $50. He sent someone to find out who she really was. And then, without a press release, without a social media post, without asking for a single thing in return, he invested in her future the same way someone had once invested in his. Quietly, completely. Because that is what grace looks like, when it is not performing for anyone. That was always the story. From the moment he walked through the door of Fielder's table, in his olive green jacket and his low-pulled cap, trying to be invisible on Valentine's night in a city lit up with fairy lights. He was never just a customer. He was never just a boss. He was a man who had been taught, at age 8, in a restaurant not unlike this one, that tired people deserve grace more than rested ones do. He had simply never forgotten it. And that is the full story of Tanya Briggs and the night that changed everything. A bad day, a quiet man, a $50 tip, and a letter that rebuilt a life. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. It could be a small town, a big city, or somewhere in between. We read every single one, and we genuinely want to know. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think twice about the tired person behind the counter, or the quiet grace of someone who could have fought back and chose to invest instead, then hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells us that stories like this one are worth telling. And if you believe that kindness is still one of the most powerful forces in the world, that a single moment of grace can redirect an entire life, then subscribe to this channel, because that is exactly what we are here for. Every single video, every single story. We find the moments that the internet almost got wrong, and we tell them the way they deserve to be told from the beginning. One more thing. There is a video appearing on your screen right now. Click it. Watch it all the way through. Because if this story stayed with you, that one will too. We will see you there.